The HOA should have known better than to roll up with a tow truck and a clipboard, thinking they could just hook my boat in front of 200 weekend guests. Because the second that engine sputtered to life and that chain rattled against my dock, I stepped out with a grin so wide people thought I'd lost my mind. But really, inside, I was just laughing at the pure comedy of what was about to unfold, because not only was the boat untouchable, the whole lake belonged to me, though they didn't know it yet, and I was about to let them dig themselves into a hole so deep that, by the end, they'd be gasping for air and begging me for mercy, with the crowd of neighbors, fishermen, and even the sheriff himself watching the greatest HOA blunder in history collapse like a sinking yacht. That morning had started out like any other. I was sitting on the porch of my cabin, coffee in hand, mist rolling off the water, birds gliding across the early light, families already down by the shore barbecuing and setting up for the big weekend event. The laughter echoed across the lake, and for a moment, everything felt peaceful, just as it should. But that peace shattered the minute Karen, self-declared queen of the HOA, strutted down my dock in those ridiculous oversized sunglasses and a sun hat big enough to shade half the lake, flanked by 2 board members trailing behind her like royal guards, waving papers and shouting about supposed violations no one had ever agreed to. Before I could even greet her, she'd already dialed the tow company, so convinced she had the right to strip me of my boat, repeating her favorite phrase, "Rules are rules, and I'm the law around here." The tow truck driver looked hesitant, scratching his head and muttering about how strange it was to haul a 40-foot boat off a private dock in front of 100 people, but Karen jabbed her finger at him, screeching that my boat was blocking community access. Meanwhile, a dozen neighbors were biting their tongues not to laugh, because everyone knew I'd never joined their so-called association. But Karen, she had a talent for making life miserable, acting like her rules covered every inch of the lake, even the spots she had no legal claim to. I let the moment cook, leaning against the railing, sipping my coffee, letting the tension bubble, because honestly, nothing delights a crowd more than watching the mighty trip over their own shoelaces. As Karen barked orders for the chain to be hooked, one of her minions slipped on the dock, went sprawling, and splashed into the water, sending the crowd into hysterics. Right then, I knew this wasn't just some petty clash. This was the start of something spectacular. Karen tried to recover, screaming she'd find anyone who mocked her, but the sheriff, my brother, just in for some barbecue, showed up in his cruiser, hat tipped low, asking in the driest tone, "What in the world is going on here?" Couldn't have timed it better if I'd planned it. Karen froze, realizing she'd just staged her grand power play right in front of the only authority who actually mattered. Neighbors swarmed closer, phones out, recording every second, and you could practically hear the whispers. The HOA finally went too far. My brother leaned on the cruiser and asked the tow driver for paperwork authorizing the job. The poor guy just stammered he was told it was community property, a claim so laughable my brother let out a bark of disbelief, shooting me a look like he was 2 seconds from pulling out the legal documents stashed in my cabin. But I gave a subtle shake of my head. It wasn't time yet. No, I wanted Karen to dig deeper, to put herself on record as loudly as possible before I crushed this charade. Energy was electric. Kids pointing and whispering, old-timers pulling up lawn chairs, someone setting out extra coolers. The whole lake was settling in for a show. Karen ranted about community standards, safety hazards, and bylaws that didn't exist, her words echoed by laughter and captured on a dozen phones. She tried to slap a bright orange violation sticker on my boat, but the hull was waxed so slick it peeled off right in her hand, which sent the crowd into another round of laughter. She shrieked that I'd regret mocking the HOA, that I couldn't hide behind family ties forever. I leaned in close and told her, quietly, that I'd been waiting for this moment, and once she crossed this line, there was no going back, and she'd just crossed it with both feet. The tow truck driver finally refused to go any further, muttering about lawsuits and shaking his head as he drove off, leaving Karen stranded, red-faced, in front of the entire gathering. As she stormed back up the dock swearing vengeance, my brother and I exchanged a glance. The game was on. The next morning, the echoes of laughter were still bouncing off the water, but I knew Karen wouldn't back down. People like her never do. They doubled down, more arrogance, more desperate schemes. So I poured another coffee, pulled open the drawer, and looked at the deed, yellowed paper, signed by my grandfather and the county clerk decades ago. The lake had been in my family long before Karen and her clipboard arrived. I remembered the day my grandfather handed me that envelope, telling me one day the lake would need someone to stand up against the kind of fools who confused paperwork with power. He knew, even back then, the type who'd come crawling. For years I'd chosen not to flaunt my ownership, let people fish, boat, barbecue, never once demanding a fee or recognition, while Karen and her board strutted around, inventing rules to squeeze money out of folks, finding kids for skipping stones, threatening letters about mailbox heights. All while the real owner just sat on the porch, watching the show. But now it was time. Karen reappeared the next afternoon with a stack of papers and a smug smile, rent-a-cops flanking her, reading off fake violations from noise complaints to improper mooring. The crowd from yesterday gathered again, hoping for round two. I stayed on the porch until she demanded I come accept her citations personally. I walked down, coffee cup in hand, let her bluster about bylaws and safety codes, and when she declared the HOA had voted to seize my dock, I laughed so hard the entire shoreline joined in. With my brother gone this time, Karen raised her voice, threatened fines and legal action. But I just nodded, asked if she'd like me to bring out my own papers, and she snapped that I had 48 hours to comply or the HOA would escalate to property seizure. I nearly choked on my coffee at the audacity. That night, I walked the dock, thinking about timing. The deed was powerful, but I wanted her to drag her circus into the center ring, to leave a trail of evidence showing her overstepping every boundary. Next day, she showed up waving a letter, supposedly from a lawyer, authorizing HOA control over the lake. Even at a glance, I saw it was a forgery. The font mismatched, signature smudged, and neighbors started to murmur. I asked her, in front of everyone, if she was absolutely sure the lake fell under HOA jurisdiction. She shouted yes, her voice cracking, and I smiled, telling her she'd need that confidence soon enough. That night, my brother came by. We sat on the porch, him shaking his head over how Karen had no idea she was standing on a trapdoor. He offered to bring deputies next time, just in case. Let her spread her nonsense wider, I said. Let her dig her own grave. By the weekend, the lake wasn't a retreat anymore. It was a stage. Neighbors, even folks from other towns, set up blankets, grills, coolers, waiting for the next act. Karen marched in with her so-called official counsel, a scrawny guy in a crooked tie, and started her speech about lawlessness, pointing at my boat like it was a pirate ship. But before she could finish, my brother showed up again with 2 deputies. He asked Karen if she knew HOA rules didn't apply to private property, and when she sputtered about safety, he asked her to cite the code. She couldn't. The fake lawyer tried to throw in some legalese, but the sheriff cut him off. You ever pass the bar? And the man stammered before shrinking back. Karen tried to slap another violation sticker on my boat, but the waxed hull shot it onto her shoe. She hurled it into the lake, and the crowd howled. Neighbors began shouting, listing grievances, calling her out for years of fines and harassment. I stepped forward, thanked her for reminding everyone how much she valued order, and promised that order was coming. Just then, one of the picnic tables collapsed under 2 mini coolers, and Karen slipped, barely catching herself, the whole shoreline roaring as she flailed. The sheriff wrapped things up, warning Karen to leave for the day, but she shrieked it wasn't over, swearing she'd bring bigger guns. I promised the crowd the next act would be unforgettable. That night, as lanterns glowed and people celebrated, my brother told me Karen would soon pull in someone with real credentials. When she did, I'd reveal the deed and end this saga. Karen wasn't the type to lick her wounds quietly. A week later, she returned with a man in a white suit she claimed was the HOA's top attorney. He waved a briefcase, citing collective jurisdiction, but when asked to show a deed, Karen had nothing. She tried to flex on a wedding party, demanding permits and fees, but the bride just laughed in her face, the whole guest list applauding. Videos of Karen's meltdown went viral, and the internet turned her into a punchline. So she leaned in, started a community awareness campaign, posted dramatic videos online, painted me as a tyrant charging outrageous fees, even though I'd never taken a dime. She called a protest at the marina, invited news crews and officials, but I organized a huge barbecue and concert the same day, drawing hundreds to witness her unravel. Karen tried to rally support, but the crowd drowned her out. Even the news turned their cameras away from her to film the party. Her SUV, parked illegally, was towed away by the sheriff's orders as the crowd chanted, "Tow the Queen." Karen tried to stop them, grabbed the tow truck, and ended up on the grass as the crowd roared. Still, she announced the HOA was suing me for eviction. But I welcomed the fight. Court was where all her fabrications would finally collapse. The courthouse was packed, neighbors lining the walls, even Judge Whitaker, an old friend of my grandfather's, presiding. Karen launched into her speech about community order. Her lawyer muttered about implied annexation. But when the judge asked for any actual deeds, there was only silence. I presented the original, notarized deed, with a chain of ownership dating back to my grandfather. The judge affirmed my ownership, dismissed the HOA's suit, ordered them to pay my legal fees, and barred them from the lake. Evicted, finally, from the very waters they'd tried to rule. That night, back at the dock, lanterns strung across the shoreline, music echoing, people laughing and dancing. The legacy of my family's lake was safe, not just in law but in spirit. And as I sat by the water, the lesson was clear. Never let anyone try to seize what's rightfully yours, and sometimes, the best way to deal with a bully is to let them expose themselves. So what do you think? Was I right to fight back, or should communities stick together even when the rules get twisted? I want to hear your thoughts. Tell me where you stand on HOAs, property rights, and standing up for what's yours. Let the debate begin.